Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm Bill Lampton, your host. As you know, every week I help us connect with top leaders in the field of communication so that we can get tips and strategies that will be beneficial for us in our professional activities. Today, we're very privileged to host someone whose name is practically synonymous with the University of Georgia. If you mention the University of Georgia, you probably are going to think of Loran Smith. Looking at his bio on the Athletic Association page, here's some of the highlights. He's referred to as one of the most versatile staff members at the University of Georgia Athletic Association, and justifiably so. He's a member of the University of Georgia Athletic Association. In his student days, he was captain of the track team and most valuable player. Many of us know Loran because of his longtime leading involvement in sports announcing at the university. During football season, he's involved in the locker room show, sideline reporter, co-host of the pregame tailgate show. And I know every game I look forward to that pregame tailgate show because I get to say hello to Loran. My wife and I often have our photos taken with him. He's one of the most congenial people that you'll ever meet. Loran is the author of many books, inducted into the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame in 1997. Newspaper columnist, we could say much more, but instead we're going to let him talk for himself. Hello, Loran. Great to have you here with us.
Good morning, Bill. Great to be with you, and honored that you would include me in your lineup of distinguished people, most of them deserving, and I don't know how you dropped your standard by picking on me.
You're high on the list, my friend. Loran, you recently, I noticed, were honored by the Grady School of Journalism at the university. So this brings me to a question. What would you say if a young student comes to you at the university and says, I'm considering a career in journalism, I'm attracted to that? What would be your advice?
Well, like everybody else, I think you speak philosophically based on your experience. Now, I looked at it this way coming along. I grew up on a farm, literally a barefoot country boy, so I had to make my way, which, as it turns out, as I look back, was something that not only was something that I had no problem with. Of course, I had no choice. Also, it allowed me to be creative, or forced me to be creative, and I wasn't anyone trained in radio, for example, but I did have an affinity for writing. I learned good manners from my mother. If somebody wrote me a letter, I sent a letter back. If I saw somebody that I knew being honored, getting some sort of award, I wrote them a note of congratulations. First of all, I did it in longhand because I didn't get introduced to the typewriter until I was in high school, finishing up in the late 50s. But I think the thing about journalism that is so great, and I know things have changed. Social media is now the dominant influence in everybody's life. And while that's okay, it does have a lot of what I consider unfortunate faults in that we learn to type messages without thought. We learn to type, we develop rather than learn. We develop habits of not correcting our words, using you, the letter U for Y-O-U-R. All of the little tricks we do to get a message out, I think, is causing us to form bad habits. Now, I don't think any president would want to say this about their institution because it probably tends to show some faults that you don't want to reveal. But most college presidents that I've had a chance to deal with will tell you that students applying for college are great on so many things, but they don't have writing skills. That's because they've used the iPhone to communicate, and they've developed a lot of habits. They can't write a simple essay of 7 or 8, 10 paragraphs. It's a struggle for some students who are super bright, for example. Now, this is not universal. But for me, learning to write for a newspaper, and I thought that was the greatest thing. I found out that my saying to people around the world even, but I don't do it every week, of course, like some businessmen do, but I do get to Europe usually once a year. And I started years ago going to Europe, and I learned to see what other cultures was like, and then I learned to see what other people were like, and to be able to write about that was fun, and it was illuminating, and it was educational. So I could get into the British Museum. Even today, Bill, I can walk up to the Louvre in the summertime, their peak season. The Louvre is one of the greatest museums in the world in Paris, and there could be a line that looks like 3 blocks, and I can walk all around that line up to the door behind the entry gate and flash my Banahero, Athens Banahero press card and get into the Louvre. I don't have to pay. In addition to that, I don't have to stand in line. Well, having those options, it's just been terrific. After a while, you can develop a reputation where people trust you. Now, I'm not in the news business, and I think that we're losing something now, that we don't have enough reporters digging into what politicians do, digging into what big business does. I think that's all good. Now, some people are going to get hurt. Some people are going to get offended, and rightfully so sometimes. But I want to write the bird dog story. I want to write the story of a guy down on his luck. I want to write the story of a guy taking his hands and doing something. I want to write about John Sale from Pine Mountain, Georgia, who gave all of his dogs not only a barrel in his backyard, but a slab, remembering them. And he believes that if we all go to heaven, as we all have been taught to appreciate the fact that we might, he expects to see his bird dogs again, his coon dogs again. That's the story I wanted to write. And that's the story I wanted to deal with. So now I can get into so many doors by flashing a press card to me. That was really something special.
Well, in other words, Loran, the person who would ask you about a career in journalism, it seems to me you're saying it's an exciting career. It opens the world for you. It lets you meet dignitaries. It lets you deal with everyday people. And I've read many of your columns. One of the things I admire so much, they're very reminiscent to me of Paul Harvey, because you as well are a great storyteller. And your articles might very well be about somebody who's been a barber for 20 or 25 years, entertaining his customers. So the common touch is there, and at the same time, you have dealt with many dignitaries. Now, another question, you have interviewed so many thousands of people by now. Let's say that I'm a business leader and I'm going to be interviewed on radio or television next week. It's something new to me. I need advice on how to do it. So I come to Loran Smith and I say, Loran, please tell me 3 or 4 things that will help me when I'm being interviewed next week on radio or television. What would you say?
Well, the first thing, of course, is to be honest. If you have a sensitive issue and you feel it's in your best interest not to talk about it, just say so. I'm not going to comment on that. But I think basically be honest, be yourself, be as accommodating as you can. Now, Bill, I don't deal with controversy in my life. And if a businessman is being interviewed, there very well could be some very sensitive questions that he just needs to avoid. And you got to find a way to, as I think many would say, dance around it. Now, I've watched people like Jack Nicklaus, who became a close friend, Arnold Palmer, whom I knew well. I've watched them. They were masters at using the pause, especially Nicklaus. You asked Nicklaus a question he didn't want to answer, or you ask him a question that might lead him into something he didn't want to discuss or talk about, he would pause and he would say, well, I suppose you could look at it that way, meaning your way, the questioner, but I prefer to look at it this way. And he would sort of go off on a detour, conversational detour, addressing things the way he wanted to address them, wind up not really directly answering the question, but making the questioner feel like he'd been accommodating. Rare talent. And a lot of people get too sensitive and they get too defensive. And you don't want people asking you personal questions. You don't want to be attacked. But I think the biggest thing I could say about the great personalities, and I think this is something that you learn from watching politicians who are really savvy and experienced, you be prepared. Vince Dooley was one of the best at that, very Nicholas-like in that you ask him a question, he didn't blurt out. He stopped, paused, and thought a while, and then he gave an answer. He was always accommodating, but he didn't always answer the question as a questioner thought he ought to answer it. I mean, I've seen that situation a lot. But I think the biggest thing is above all, you got to be honest. And if you're prepared, I know people in the sports business, and that's the arena that I've lived in, so I know it best, who try to sit down and figure out what might come up today. So you can prepare yourself, but a questioner, depending on who he is, can always give you a trick question. They can always come with something that you couldn't possibly have thought they might ask that question. But if you're prepared and if you're honest, I think you probably can utilize your vast experience, and a businessman with success is going to have vast experience. You can find a way by not letting them get under your skin, and you're able to answer most any question that comes your way.
I think what you say about not being combative is very important. You and I have been around long enough to remember a statement which might not mean so much these days, but it's the old statement about never argue with a man who buys ink by the barrel. And I appreciate your mentioning Vince Dooley, because when I was on the faculty at the university, those were the days when after a football game on Saturday, Vince would have a 1-hour show the next day. We go with sound clips and sound bites now, but he had a 1-hour program, and I'm sure he got in late from trips some of those Saturday nights, but he was masterful. And he also was, again, not combative. If they'd played poorly, if they'd lost a game, if they had not lived up to expectations, he took the responsibility for that. So that's very well said. You mentioned your friendship with Arnold Palmer and Nicholas. To me, of course, Arnold, and many people have said this since he left this earth and went to the great golf course in the sky, many people have said about him that one of the great reasons golf succeeded in the public eye is because television and Arnold Palmer came to the forefront at the same time.
Well, I think they came along at the same time, and that obviously was a wonderful marriage, but Arnold had gifts that nobody else had. You have to face it. Some people just have a way with people. Now, I think it begins by having a genuine interest in people. Arnold is famous among friends, many friends, of going to dinner. And if he knew someone at an adjoining table and that person spoke, before the evening was over, Arnold would come over and shake hands and look in the eye every person and say, how you doing, or whatever. And he gave of himself in those situations. He made everybody feel comfortable. I'm going to tell you something, and perhaps this might be a little bit of a forecast, might be a little clairvoyance involved, and that is that some people are just more naturally comfortable with people and engaging people than others. And if a guy that didn't have that gift naturally, and one who did not was the man we just spoke about, Vince Dooley. Vince was not natural with people when he came along. He was so shy. But he learned the art of looking people in the eye. He learned the art of being forthright. Vince was never evasive to the extent that he was dishonest. You can be evasive in the best interest of your program, your company, or whatever. But the guy who is the most comfortable with people in sports today that I've known, and I'm talking about some of the big names that you could throw out there, and that's Kirby Smart. Kirby, the new head coach at Georgia, graduate of the Terry College where you taught. Kirby has a natural way with people. He's engaging, he's forthright, he takes time with people. Of course, I think if he were to win a couple of national championships, which everybody wants, some of this would become a greater challenge because the demands on his time would go up significantly. But I watch him now, and I marvel at just how comfortable he is with people. Now, that has to be good for donor relations, Georgia, University of Georgia relations and goodwill, but it has to be good for him in recruiting. So I think some people are just more natural. Arnold Palmer was the most natural person at making others feel good around him that I've ever known. Now, I'll give you a good example about him. I called his longtime assistant, Doc Giffen, who's been a friend for 4 decades at least, and told him I wanted to interview Arnold one spring when I was in Orlando at his place at Bay Hill, which he owned and operated for years. And he says, how much time you need? I said, well, I've got a show that's about 30 minutes. He said, he won't have that much time. Can you get by with 15? He wasn't demanding. I said, yes, I'll take what I can get, knowing that if I went in that office and sat down and turned on a tape recorder, he was not going to make me get up and leave. I knew that. I'd been around him enough that I knew that. So not only did I get the 30 minutes, I got an extra 10 to 15 just shooting the breeze, so to speak. And not many people like Arnold. And I had one question I wanted to ask him, which reflects something about him, and that was, how many times do you think you've signed your name? Now, this took place at least 7 or 8 years ago. And his secretary had been retired a couple of years, I think, at that point. But at that time, he said, I don't know, but said my secretary, before she retired, estimated that I'd signed my name 4 million times. Well, you think about that in these terms. He kept on signing after he gave me that figure because it related to his secretary's retirement. That didn't count airports, restaurants, and everywhere he got interrupted or wherever he bumped into somebody around the world. But he was generous because he was genuinely interested in people. Now, Tiger Woods, on the other hand, I don't think he had that genuine interest in other people. He felt his time was private, so he was not generous with autographs. I'm not faulting him, I'm just explaining the difference in the two personalities. Nicholas, I don't think was that excited to sign autographs in the beginning, but he learned to appreciate the value of other people interested in him, and he became very generous. Really, and I watched his career develop almost from the very beginning. But now, these are sports figures. But what does Arnold Palmer signing an autograph for everybody he meets, what did that mean in business? Translated into he couldn't put his name on anything that didn't sell. At least that's my view of things in regard to signing autographs. And I've talked to a lot of athletes. Oh, it's a waste of time. And then I had a conversation with Adam Wainwright from Brunswick, who's still pitching for the St. Louis Cardinals, about Stan Musial. And he said this, and it's really different today, Bill, with all the demands that athletes have, all of the communications that we have. He said the players feel like you just don't sign in the locker room. That's our sanctuary. That's where we go to be alone, to be to ourselves. He says, but Stan Musial, the great Stan Musial, he signed for everybody. He come in the locker room, he signed for all the players, wanted his autograph. He gave it to them. So Wainwright was saying, I learned that being generous with your time is not all that difficult. It's just that you have to develop a philosophy. And if you want to be accommodating with people, you can choose to be accommodating or not.
It's interesting, Loran, that you mentioned Stan Musial. Quite a few years back, I was on a business trip. I was in the St. Louis airport. There was a Stan Musial hotel that I stayed in right by the airport. I recall going into the airport the next day. I saw this very dapper gentleman standing talking to some people at the ticket counter. I realized it was Stan Musial, and he was giving them a very warm, genuine smile. He was very approachable. And it's wonderful that we have the Arnold Palmers and the Stan Musials and others. And in fact, as you say, this is a great lesson for business leaders. When you get to the position that you're head of a very, very large organization, this does not give you the right to become invisible. In fact, it's the time you should be most visible, most open to communication, and genuinely interested in people. A great lesson for our business. Loran, it's been wonderful having you with us on the Biz Communication Show. I know there are those who would like your contact information. So if you'll share that with us now, please.
Yes, my email address is my full name, LORANSMITH, at sports, SPORTS, Loran Smith at sports.uga.edu.
And speaking of approachable sports leaders, we have just talked with one. Loran is one of the most receptive, gracious people that I've had the pleasure of knowing across several decades. And now that Loran has given his contact information, I'm glad to share mine. As I mentioned, the Biz Communication Guy. So my website is biz, that's B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. Look forward to hearing from you, review my services, see how I can assist you in your business. Thanks to those of you who have joined us on video, and thanks to those who have heard us today on podcast. And Loran Smith, many thanks to you again for being our guest.
Thank you. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.